This is Cold Start.
And we're fresh back from Monterey Car Week. I think any car enthusiast's haven, essentially. I mean, it's the best week of the year. All of the people within the car community, the who's who's, any sort of collectible vehicle that you could imagine exists in Monterey for this glorious week.
No matter where you are in the car community, you can find your niche. Somewhere in there is the thing you're into and the most exceptional example of it that you've probably ever seen in your life. Or that poster car that you hope someday maybe you might be able to get a glimpse of. You see 4 of them parked on the road together. It's just an unbelievable scene.
It's a total real-life Forza lobby. You cruise around Monterey, and you're just seeing all of these unbelievable supercars, hypercars, like you were saying, anything you could possibly imagine. So we just got back. We're going to give our take of our adventure going to Monterey Car Week. Of course, there's a massive amount of different car shows that you can go to, ones that are so well known within the car community like Quail and the Concours d'Elegance. There's so many unveilings of new hypercars and supercars, and all the high-end luxury brands are trying to push their next beautiful model. But of course, what did we do? I mean, we're here at Sonoma Raceway. We love to drive cars. We're racers. We have a racing background. So, of course, we found ourselves at Laguna Seca down in Monterey to watch the Rolex Motorsport Reunion.
Yeah, not that there's anything wrong with those other events. They're fun, but after a while, if you go to the Quail every year, it kind of starts to look the same. Like it's about maybe 10 or 15% different than the last time. So you go to the races are different every single time. So this is the Monterey Motorsports Reunion. They call it the Rolex. That's the title sponsor. A huge, cool swath of cars out there on the racetrack being used for what they were designed to be used for. The people driving them, let's give a lot of credit. Sometimes we talk about vintage racing and there's this sense that, it's people out there doing parade laps and sort of showing off their car, and it's all just for the ceremony and kind of the fanfare around it. But these drivers were driving the wheels off of those cars. We saw near wrecks, we saw spins, we saw oil downs, we saw people sliding cars into turns. They weren't taking it real easy, I gotta say.
Yeah, no, it was an action-packed weekend, and not only do you get to watch these cars in motion on the road course itself and racing one another, but walking around the paddock is a car show of itself. I always like to say, what's better than a show car? Any race car. And that's the biggest downside of these other shows that happen is, yeah, it's cool to see these high-end vehicles, but it kind of gets boring of they're static. They're just sitting there. I want to see it. I want to see it on track. I want to hear what it sounds like. I want to see it in motion and getting used as it's intended, like any car is intended to be driven.
Hell yeah, brother. And this year was a really special one. Now, this event happens every year, but there's a different featured class or certain kind of car that they're going to highlight for each year's Motorsports Reunion. This year, there were 2. So it being the 75th anniversary of Formula One, F1 had a special exhibit and a ton of cars out on track racing one another. And it was also one of our favorite, near and dear to our hearts, we just talked about a few episodes ago, IROC. So as far as I know, maybe other than one exhibition event that occurred at Lime Rock Park, this was the only time that they had all 7 generations, from the Porsche RSRs to the Camaros, the Firebirds, the Crown Royal and True Value labeled cars, the Dodges. They were all there together competing on the same racetrack. What a thrill that was.
Yeah, talk about childhood dream of watching those Firebirds on TV when I was much younger and just getting into being a motorsport fan, to being able to hear those cars in person, especially since they had the X-pipes and the boom tubes. And if you're a NASCAR fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's back when they were high-pitched 9,000 RPM V8s and just sounded like nothing else. And being able to hear those cars in person, let alone to watch them drop down the corkscrew, was unbelievable. And to put the cherry on top, of course, they called up a lot of the drivers whose names were on the sides of these vehicles to come out and drive them. So not only are you watching every single generation of IROC and the unbelievable history that that series had, which we talked about in our IROC episode, but you got to see those people that got to drive them back in those days, they're driving those exact cars. And I think one of the coolest part was, we walked around the paddock, we checked these cars out. We'll talk more about what these cars looked like in person, which was just so cool to see. But we also saw these drivers out of these vehicles chatting with one another, talking about the track, smiling, making jokes. And it was just so cool to see that they were having as much fun as we were watching them.
Watching these guys relive the old days or doing their interviews for media, what have you. Scott Pruitt with his helmet next to him in front of the car that he drove IROC, just there chatting up another guy who's out there. We saw Mark Martin in the paddock. We ran into, Bobby Labonte was out there in front of his car. Not to mention the other cars and the other drivers that we didn't have a chance to see, but you had a lot of representation from the guys who drove these things. It was super cool. Ken Schrader was there.
Zak Brown was driving one. So Zak Brown bought one of these cars, owner of McLaren Racing. Obviously, huge motorsports fan, was driving a bunch of different vehicles during the weekend. We'll tell a story about one of those near misses, near crashes, which actually involved Zak Brown, which was everyone held their breath for a second there as we watched some very valuable cars almost get into contact. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, no doubt. And we saw Kurt Busch. Rick Hendrick was there, and Jeff Gordon was driving the Jeff Gordon car.
Which is so cool.
Oh, my God. Our West Coast representative. Thank you very much.
So walking around these old IROC cars, I mean, Ray Everham and the team that's working with IROC to restore these vehicles has done an unbelievable job. I mean, walking around, there was some cars where you could tell they still had like some of that original patina, which you're like, that's so cool. This car is like untouched from back in its heyday. And then there's these other cars where you can tell it was a ground up restoration and they look brand new. I mean, the interiors were spotless, the exteriors, everything about them. And it's just so rad that they were able to pull one car from each generation. I mean, the Dodges, I had never really even heard of the Dodges until we did some research for our other episode. And I think those were my favorite that were there.
They look great. I mean, to be able to peer into these cars, seeing them all staged together in the paddock, to see that plaque up there on the dash that says, IROC official car number, whatever it was, to get a look around the car and a real feel for the size and scale of these things, to see the mechanics working on the cars in that paddock area. We saw them beating the crap out of the underside of the James Hunt Camaro. I guess it had come in from practice and it needed some help. And it was what we call percussive engineering, man. They were banging on something there underneath the hood. It was so cool to see it just in that moment, like you might imagine it took place the first time around. And Ray Evernham was out there in a Pontiac Firebird, and Rob Kaufman was out there in a Dodge Avenger. So it's cool to see them representing sort of the latter year cars as well. And I was a little surprised. There were way fewer of the Porsche RSR cars out there on track than I would have expected. But we did see the AJ Foyt car out there. We saw the Danny Holm car. Just a really cool selection of all the cars from different eras that represent what IROC is. And it felt like the energy was so good. There were so many people at this event. I think it was the best turnout they've had at the Motorsports Reunion in years, if not ever. You just heard everybody talking about it, saying, wow, there's so many people here coming here for this race.
I think for those Porsches being out there, I think they're the most valuable of all the IROC cars. So maybe it makes a little bit more sense of those might be a little bit more irreplaceable than some of the later year cars where they're basically just tube chassis with fiberglass bodies. Might be a little bit easier to fix those ones up.
Fair enough. But man, the dude who was driving the Peter Gregg 78 Camaro was wheeling that car. We were set up for part of the race up at the corkscrew. So we got to see everybody kind of drive down the corkscrew, and seeing these guys dicing it up going through that turn or those couple of turns that we had visibility into was just unreal. And the cars, they represented themselves really well. You look at those things and you think, that's a 50-year-old car. What could it possibly do out there? That sounds like an antique. And these things were hauling the mail, and they sounded phenomenal doing it. It wasn't that high-pitched, whiny sound like we get from the Formula One cars, which sound amazing. This was a low grumble. This was, these cars are here for business.
Yeah, I like that there was like decent diversity in the ways that the cars sounded through the generations. And yeah, you're right. These guys were hucking these things around. I mean, during the race, there was some like door to door contact like you would expect in a NASCAR race. Like these guys weren't afraid to get after it. And that made for an awesome show and definitely satisfied my itch of like, I've always wanted to see the IROC cars, and this was like anything beyond my expectations.
You could tell the announcers on the PA were just as excited as the rest of us to be there. And here's this guy, he's just announcing the race, and he says, I have the fortune to be sitting here next to Al Unser Jr. This is like a pinch me moment. And he had a nice interview with Al on the PA. Hearing that going on while the cars were getting staged to go out and race, it just gave you that whole 360-degree view of things, from the fans to the people who are pros in this, who drive, who help create the cars, who help make the spectacle of these events. Everybody was in it to win it.
And I think that's what's so fun about historic racing is that everyone involved, whether they were the famous people back in the day or they're famous announcers, or if you're just a fan from home, everyone is excited and enthusiastic to be there. Like no one is grumpy. Everyone's just like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like the announcer was just, beside himself that he got to sit next to Al Unser Jr. Al Unser Jr. was beside himself that he got to see his old car being raced by an individual that's a big fan of the Unser family. And like everyone's just stoked all the time, whether it was like Kurt Busch being interviewed or Pruitt or whoever it was, or us fans in the stands, arms in the air. Everyone's excited. Everyone's having a good time.
Yeah, you're just out in the paddock, and along comes the car that's getting ready to go stage at the pre-grid for the next race. And you see the Castrol prototype come by, and you're like, that's Zak Brown driving that car right there. And he's just like everybody else out there to do his thing, there to run his race. And it's such an open and inclusive environment where you can get access to the cars and the garages, the drivers, the mechanics. The whole thing was put together in this way that you felt like you were almost a part of it yourself.
Vintage racing I would put above any of these other shows that are going on in Monterey. Not to discredit them, but each one of these cars that are there that are running for the weekend are the one of one. They are that actual car that raced during its era in that livery. There is no duplicate of each one of these vehicles. They are valuable, they are collectible, but beyond that, they're still being used, they're still being maintained, they're still being out there in the public eye the way that they were raced back in whatever their era was, the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever it was. And so beyond the IROC presentation that they had, which they were dead center in the paddock space and they displayed them very nicely, but the other marquee, like you were talking about, the 75th anniversary of Formula One, what an unbelievable set that they had for those cars. And they picked a car from every era and every generation of Formula One, all the way back to, the early 50s of when everything originated, all the way up to a current era car. They even had the 2024 Constructors Championship McLaren, the actual car.
Yeah, driven by Lando Norris. It was there in the flesh that you could get right up too close to, get a look at it, take your pictures, see what it's about, see the scale of these cars, see those swooping lines that may be a little hard to make out when you're looking on the TV, and even if you went to the race, you wouldn't have anywhere near the access to get as close to the cars as we had a chance to do.
Yeah, and it's crazy. And like you would think like, oh yeah, these cars have to be like locked up, far away that you can't even get close to them. And I think that's what's so cool about this community, especially at a marquee event like this at Laguna Seca, is yes, there is protection to these vehicles, but for the most part, like, everyone's super respectful and you can walk around these vehicles and you can get as close as you feel comfortable without obviously being disrespectful or touching anything. But they kind of give you that freedom and everyone has that mutual respect for these vehicles. And I really enjoyed my time walking from the 1950s and as everything progressed within Formula One and seeing how the design, whether it was the suspension or to the aerodynamics or whatever it was, how that progressed through the years and then has come to this huge pinnacle of, the last generation, which were, the 2019 or the 2018 cars to the newest ones. And you can look at the differences between those generations of, wow, look at how like the advancements happen in the aerodynamics, or maybe even the newest generation where they shortened the wheelbase and simplified the aerodynamics of looking at the previous generation of how much more complex the little winglets were, whatever it was. It's just unbelievable to be able to put your eyes on these vehicles.
Yeah, seeing the incremental evolution of these platforms, going from the complete high-tech wizardry that we have on the current cars, all the way back to the cigar tube cars. These cars where the driver's legs were the crash box. They were ahead of the front axle on the car. Seeing the names of these drivers on the sides of the cars that you've heard about, you've revered, and now these were the actual cars that they raced when they were out there. Getting to see those liveries on the cars. Some of them were so cool, and I really like the lion on the Samson car, the Marlboro liveries that are just so iconic. So many of those cars just had such a cool look to them. The candy car that was out there. Of course, it was super cool to see the Toro Rosso Red Bull car out there, and just in such a line with all these cars, it was like all of the colors of IROC as well as they're represented together because they're so iconic in that colorful nature. All of these Formula One cars in a row in all of their different colors and shapes and sizes. You know, the black and gold of the John Player Special to the red and white to the red and blue to the all green. It just made for such a cool look and a vibe of the whole thing. They did a fantastic job putting on this display.
And I don't think that has ever happened anywhere else ever, to have that many cars together, lined up chronologically like that. It's just a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And I would say, 85-90% of the F1 cars that are there, they are the legit cars. They're not show cars. They're not replicas. They had a couple that were like the newest generations that were technically show cars. One of them was the Mercedes show car. Then the other one was the Red Bull team show car. But other than those two cars, I'm pretty sure the rest of them were legitimately the cars.
Yeah, a lot of people go out and they see these cars at an event, even like the Quail, and you'd be surprised. A lot of those are just show cars. These were cars that were manufactured for marketing purposes to put out there. They were never once intended to be a driver, the actual car to be raced. And the organizers of the Monterey Motorsports Reunion included people like Bruce Canepa, who's extremely well known and sort of revered in collector circles. He's also part of the group called Friends of Laguna Seca, who actually administer and manage the track and have done a great job in sort of bringing it up and increasing the quality of the experience that you have when you're at that racetrack. There's a quote by him. He said, "Replicas, continuations, or overbuilt cars that differ from the day they originally raced are simply not accepted. We require and visitors expect only the best of the real cars with the racing pedigree and historical significance." They take this stuff seriously. They didn't even allow into the show or into the racing cars that didn't have documentation and history that was in alignment with the thing that they wanted to show off, which was real racing of these things that once were out there or the things that are more current and having them all together. I think that's so special, and it gives you something that you can't get out of a museum exhibit. You can't get out of a car show day. You can't get out of seeing that one car that somebody brought to a thing, because by and large, those aren't the actual ones.
Yeah, and I think that makes it even crazier that these guys put them on track and race one another wheel to wheel. Once again, this is not parade laps. Like, these guys are going for it. And some of those front runners, you want the trophy, regardless of, what your vehicle's worth or how irreplaceable it is. So speaking of that, let's move into this story of, we talked about this near miss that we witnessed, and unbelievable. We posted the video on our Instagram at This Is Cold Start. So if you want to see the video, go ahead and go to our Instagram, check it out.
So you have to set the picture for us first here, right? Because you go to the racetrack, you can watch the races from a lot of different places, and there's all these classes of cars just coming out in succession. So each specific race they sort of named after a famous racer or a class of cars. So they had the Legends of Endurance Racing class that was all prototype cars from...
I think it was 1980s to 1990s.
That sounds right. So these are the IMSA GTP GTO Group C cars, 1981 to 1991. And they called this the Hurley Haywood Endurance Race for the Hurley Haywood Trophy. So this is where you saw Zak Brown out in the 1989 Jaguar XJR10.
So sick. So that's the one that has the Castrol livery and the rear skirt. So the rear tires are covered on it. The front tires are exposed. An iconic car. I mean, an unbelievable... One of those vehicles where it's like, I'm not old enough to have ever seen that car in its heyday, but I've seen plenty of photos and videos on social media that I was like, oh my God, it's that car.
Yeah, and completely separate from that. Like on the other pole, you had the 88 Chevy Beretta race car out there and the 85 Mercury Capri. So what different cars those were, those from the Jags?
Right. And I think that was like the Trans Am era. So like those were all those tube chassis, wide fendered, V8, basically just ground shakers. And so like, yeah, like a diversity within that group. You obviously had like the prototypes, like the Mazda was out there, which I didn't know that there was a difference between the 787 and a 767.
I'm sure nobody will call you on it.
I'm sure all the Mazda people are going to call me on it. I guess it was a difference in the engines that they had. One of them was a 3-rotor, one of them was a 4-rotor, but basically they both had that iconic livery of like the Dayglow orange with the green.
Oh, yeah, the Renown livery on them.
Yes, and so I think the one that was there racing that day was the 767.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, Porsche 962s and Porsche 924 GTR. I'm not sure I've ever seen one of those on the racetrack before. The really iconic Nissan prototype car was being driven by Bruce Canepa. It was just such a cool combination of cars. There was the other Mazda prototype too, the RX 792 prototype.
Oh my God, that thing looked like a spaceship. And so before this race got started, we actually were fortunate enough to hear both of those rotary-powered prototypes, one from the 80s, one from the 90s, get warmed up. And Mazda did this awesome thing where they rolled the cars out from their tent. Everyone was able to surround one of those cars as they did the whole warm-up procedure, computer plugged in, we're able to rev them up and handed out earplugs to everyone so they weren't liable if they blew anyone's eardrums out. And those cars just sounded so unbelievable.
Oh, the sound of those cars was phenomenal. And then I had a total kick. There was a car, the 1991, it was American Auto Racing, the Dan Gurney team, AAR, the Toyota Eagle with the 99 on the front. I've actually been on the racetrack with that car at Thunder Hill before for an event. And to go out there and see that thing racing among all these other cars, like, I got a chill. It was the coolest thing. I'm like, I've been on track with that thing? How is this possible?
No, such an unbelievable group. And there was like the Buick Trans Am that had the turbo V6 in it, the
Sick.
Mercury Trans Am
XR4
car.
Ti.
Yeah, and it was the only one of that fleet of Mercurs that had the V8 in it. So there was a couple different motor variations. The one that was there had the V8. You have like the Texaco prototype, a huge collection of cars and like different motors and the sounds and everything. Like, this is probably one of my favorite groups that goes out. Plus, like, you think about 80s and 90s racing, and like, to me, that's kind of like the pinnacle and the heyday of like the really cool liveries, boxed fenders, turbo fans, like all the good stuff about motorsports.
And we're just huge fans of this stuff, right? So what's the ultimate iconic place you can go? IROC was racing first, and then this group came out next. We ran up to the top of the corkscrew, got our position framed nicely so you can see the cars turning in at the top of the turn, coming down, seeing if anybody was going to make that Alex Zanardi pass on the inside.
Oh, yeah.
Coming down into turn 9, which is a super technical corner. So it was the perfect place to be set up for this stuff. And we had just watched IROC go through their motions. And now here come the prototypes.
The race is going on. It's a tight battle in the front with the prototypes. They're changing position, who's in the lead. It's a fierce battle, and it's measuring up to be an amazing race to the finish. And the Toyotas lead in the Jaguar. And all of a sudden, between turns 3 and 4 at Laguna, the Toyota spins out. Straight up just does a 360, middle of the track, doesn't hit anything, stays on the pavement, but then forfeits the lead to the Jaguar, which is closely followed by the Nissan, and then followed back by the Mazda 767.
And when you're set up in front of a turn, you have some idea what else is going on elsewhere on track. But here we are, and the Toyota's in front, and the Castrol Jag is right behind. And the Toyota's in front, and here comes the Jaguar. And Toyota's in front, and here comes the Jaguar. And then here comes the Jaguar. Where's the Toyota?
And so Jaguar drops down into the corkscrew, and all of a sudden, Zak Brown loses it. And we're like, oh! And he spins, doesn't do a full 360, does kind of a 180, and he's still parked on the track. He's kind of driver's right on the exit of the corkscrew, kind of out of the way. And we're like, everyone's kind of holding their breath of like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? So then the Nissan comes into frame. It's dropping down the corkscrew. The Nissan loses it. And we're like, oh no, like there has to be something on track. What's going on? And then the Mazda is following close behind as the Nissan's still spinning, thankfully not towards Zak Brown and the Castrol car, but now the track's blocked at this point. Both of those two vehicles are basically at the same distance of one another, both broadside, and here comes the Mazda, and you're like,
Oh,
Oh
no.
no, we're about to witness
Carnage.
legends disappear.
All in one fell swoop, this would have been a catastrophic level loss if these cars all came together.
Fortunate enough, the driver of the Mazda, kudos to him, was able to, one, get the vehicle slowed down a little bit, and at the last second, make a maneuver to the left, almost off track, to barely miss the Nissan.
It was so close. So those holding your breath moments because you know what might happen is going to be bad news. We're just waiting to see. And these guys are racing hard. They're close to each other, coming down into the corkscrew. It's a blind turn in. You can't see what's up ahead of you till you're dropping 3 stories down to the bottom of this turn.
Yeah, I mean, the whole crowd let out a unified gasp once this whole thing occurred, which, I mean, it happened in the course of a handful of seconds, right? There wasn't enough time for flaggers to get flags out or anything. And this is just a testament, like we're talking about, like these guys are racing these vehicles. So if there's any sort of change in conditions, obviously oil on the track is probably worst case scenario. But when you're talking about historical race cars, things happen. I went back and re-looked at the footage from the live stream, and you could see one of those Trans Am cars came down the corkscrew a couple cars before the prototypes that came in, and he shortcutted it a little bit on the bottom end and smacked his oil pan and just dumped fluid all the way down from the exit of the corkscrew down through 9 all the way into pit lane.
You could just see the posture of his car looked a little weird when he was going through that turn. You're like, some bottoming out or something must be happening here.
Right, and we could see as the spectators that thick, darkened line of where all the oil was. Unfortunately for these prototype drivers, they're going so fast and they have so much power, and just that one little slight misjudgment and those cars are going around. So thankfully, everything was fine. It was only a near miss, but what an exciting moment.
Oh, for sure. And just to have that experience of being so up close and personal when that kind of stuff is happening. You're up there kind of close to the fence because you just want to see the action. And then all of a sudden, there's more action than any of us expected there to be.
There's some real action.
Real action. So they threw the yellow flag and then they red flagged the race. They had to get the mess cleaned up to make sure that they could be safe with all the rest of the cars. But before they had a chance to finish that, we see the tow vehicle go out. And the tow vehicle positioning itself at the end of the corkscrew. So we know this isn't the only stuff that got stuck out on track while we were watching. So tow vehicle at Laguna, they only tow cars to the corkscrew, right? They get that far and then they allow the car sort of on their own recognizance using gravity to get down the hill, because if you're trying to tow a car down the hill, it's a good chance it'll run into the back of the tow truck. So we saw that coming out, and then I think it was the Mazda prototype, the RX-792, that they were coming to bring back in because it had some other failure earlier in the lap before all this stuff happened. So it was kind of lucky for them maybe in a way that they didn't have to go through this mess with all the other cars who wound up spinning around.
Right, exactly. So in that moment, that prototype was gravity driven, which was funny, but it was gorgeous to see that car, nice slow pass by. But yeah, quite the exciting race on our first day out there at the reunion. And that's the thing, is like you go to these events and you think like, oh, what historic racing, how interesting can it be? And then all of a sudden we're just treated with an amazing IROC race, as well as this unbelievable moment with the prototypes as well.
Yeah, it was good times all around, even to the point where there's things that, not every class is your class. The ragtime racers were out there. They're undeniably cool that they're still able to run these cars that are 100 plus years old, and they bring them out on the racetrack. And, there's a whole procedure for doing this that doesn't even look like driving a car looks like to us today. Handbrakes on the outside of the car, all kinds of gears and pulleys and things going on. So, it's cool to see them, but they don't light you up all the same way. But then there's these unexpected moments when, hey, you happen to be there watching the end of a race of a bunch of cars you're really excited about, and then the next group comes out and you're like, okay, well, maybe I'll stick around for this just to see what that's all about. And I think it was the USRRC cars that were the 60s era, small open body sports car and prototype cars. These were like Lotuses and Elvas and Lolas and some McLarens in the group that were out there racing together. And at first we're like, okay, this would be cool to see. There's some of these sort of rounded off looking back cars. I think all the Lotuses kind of had that similar look, but there was an interesting diversity to this group. And we were set up between turn 3 and turn 4 at Laguna. So the really iconic bridge, the Dunlop Bridge there, we're set up right after that, looking down toward turn 3. And then here comes this buzz, because the cars are coming soon. And they come around turn 3, and man, these things are sliding from turn 3 to the exit curb, coming into turn 4, they were pushing hard. And I think they were one of the best races we got to see all weekend long.
Yeah, they kept it super tight together. There was a couple cars in that group that had V8s in them, and you're looking at these tiny little cars, and you're like, does that thing really need a V8? It doesn't. There's no way it needs a V8.
How'd they even cram it into that thing?
It's basically just a motor and and that's about all it has room for, and obviously extra wide rear tires. I mean, they looked absolutely insane. And then obviously those other ones, they kind of had smaller motors, and they were more like momentum cars, but that's what made for that great racing. I mean, they were nose to tail, side by side, moving and sliding these cars around. Now, my favorite guy that was in this race, he was dead last and significantly slower than any other car on track, but he fully committed to the period correct outfit, and he had the open face helmet with the goggles on, and he looked like he was out there for a Sunday drive, but I bet you he was having as much fun, if not more fun, than anyone else out there.
That guy was having a blast. Every time I saw him, I could swear I saw the smile on his face as he was going by, and he's bringing up the rear, he's getting lapped, there's traffic before him and after him all along the way, and this guy's just too little long, having an absolute fun time of the thing, which is what this is all about. People coming to celebrate what they want to be a part of, this time, this era, these kind of cars, just the opportunity to be out there with other people racing these cars who have the same sort of mindset. It was such a good time.
Yeah, I mean, the sights and sounds of vintage racing is just unmatched by anything else.
And the smells too. I know that sounds funny, but smelling the fuel, the exhaust, the tires, everything there combining in that probably really toxic mixture, but that we all go and we breathe in when we're around these cars. And it's part of that sensory feeling, the kind of thing that'll make you remember it the next time you smell that combination of smells somewhere else. And, you know, different fuels were used for the different cars, so there's just that variation as well. And again, the colors, the looks of the cars, the stances of the cars, you know, big fat wide tires or the skinny little narrow tires, just all that variation on them. As people who love cars of all kinds, it really had something for everybody. And it really lit up all those different parts of my brain, even ones that I didn't know were so enthusiastic about some of those things. It really was a good feeling.
Now, another marquee car that we got to see at Laguna Seca that was on display, we didn't get to see it go out on track, unfortunately, but the Porsche 963 RSP was there. The one of one, street legal Porsche prototype was at Laguna Seca.
Yeah, this was the hypercar LMP1 car that Porsche uses to campaign in Le Mans, right? They're trying to win the 24-hour of Le Mans in this car. And they made a one-off, one-of-one street legal version of it for none other than Roger Penske. And that car was there, and the doors were open, and you could go over and peer inside and see the single seat that was set up, and the headset because you couldn't possibly hear anything over the engine in this car, and the screens because there was no rear windshield to see out of. It was all just cameras. And the shape of this car and the beauty of the upholstery and the beautiful leather, the brown leather that was on the inside of the car that matched perfectly with the silver outside. It was so tastefully done, yet still it was a freaking race car, and it's street legal. It had French license plates on it. It was kind of just unreal.
And not to mention, of course, it had a cup holder. There was a singular cup holder on the inside of this thing, just so if you didn't know it was a street car, you could have a drink while you're in there. And that's what was so cool about this event is that's a one-of-one car that's worth who knows how much money. And it was there with the doors open. You could stick your head in it. You could look in. Everyone was always going to be respectful of it. But there was no ropes around it. There was no strong security that I could see. But everyone would manage their distance, respectfully take photos of it. But it allowed you to be the car enthusiast you wanted to be and actually, peer your head around it and look at the shape and the curvature of the fenders and the aerodynamics. And that interior was absolutely unbelievable, wrapped in that gorgeous leather. And it's just so neat to be able to get up close and personal with these vehicles.
There's different types of motorsports for different fans, and some of the people who watch endurance racing and prototype cars aren't super into open wheel formula cars like Formula One cars, are not the same people into the Trans Ams and the big heavy muscle and the iron cars, aren't the same people who are into stock cars, aren't the same people. And you had an opportunity to see those in such rapid succession. I think it made a lot of new fans out of people that thought oh, well, I only like this kind of thing. And then along comes the 70s and 80s vintage F1 cars out there. And you see the big air intakes up on top and the Jägermeister livery, the Marlboro livery car. You see the John Player special black and gold car. You see all these different shapes and sizes of that evolution of the Formula One car from the 60s and the 70s out there racing together. And again, being put to the test, not just doing parade laps around the track, but actually being driven hard to the point where there were car failures. I had a friend who was racing one of the vintage 1970s Formula One car, and we saw him coming running into the paddock at one point. They're pushing the car alongside him because these are old cars, and some of them, frankly, weren't all that reliable the first time they ran. So 50 years later, they're going to have some mechanical issues to hammer out. They sounded great out there, a lot of them with those Cosworth DFV engines and, stuff from that era. It was just such a good time and really made me want to be part of that. I don't know that I'll ever be able to go hang with the people who are driving some of the things like that out on track, but it made me want to be connected to it in some way. Even if I can't drive the car, being up around it, talking to the people who are out there driving it, talking to the mechanics who take care of these cars, who don't have any possible supplier they can go to get the things that they need. They're doing fabrication, they're doing custom work, they're doing welding, they're doing all the mechanical and engineering work that these cars needed and maybe had huge teams with huge budgets looking after. And now it's on the people who are trying to make this car run again for series like these.
Yeah, the guy that was working on the James Hunt Camaro was definitely doing some custom work with that hammer, let me tell you. But that's what makes this fun, and I agree with you. The more vintage, historic races that I've gone to, I'm like, I need to get involved in this, right? I mean, we think about like pro racing and driving cars and what that means nowadays, but it's like go drive a vintage car. I think that's as fun, if not maybe more fun, than being part of a racing series because of this like glam that kind of surrounds historic racing and the feeling that it gives you of like throwing it back to the heyday. I mean, like, I would have loved to jump in one of those IROC cars or, vintage NASCARs and things like that. Those guys just seem like they're having so much fun, and you get the custom suit done to match the livery of the car back in the heyday and all that sort of stuff. And, it'd be worthwhile to find, these individuals that have been able to collect these cars and put them into their collection. They might not have the physique or the physical capability to manhandle them around the racetrack, and that allows a lot of these pro drivers to jump in these vehicles, and that's what kind of like makes it fun of seeing these well-known names jump into some of these old cars and wheel them around and stuff like that. So I got to figure out a way to get myself on the list of those individuals.
You and I both know and have experienced, even in club level racing, there's guys out there just taking it way too seriously. They're not out there really to have a fun time first or even second. They're out there to compete. They're out there to win. They get caught up in that mindset so much. And here are other people who have been wildly successful in their life, some of it through motorsports, some of it through other realms, out there getting a chance to do it and just smile ear to ear and having a good time and bringing their friends and family and meeting new people out there. And it's just such an inspiring place to be. And even speaking of inspiration, we got to see the Ghazi 935 era 911 out there, that pink and white, which was the inspiration, at least in part, for your E36 livery at one point, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was another example of a German race car that was sponsored by a Japanese company. And I loved Japanese touring car racing, and the E36 M3 that I own, they raced those, the 318 version, of course, for touring car racing. But they raced those in Japan, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like, I want to put like a, Japanese touring car livery on my car. And so many people made fun of me of putting Japanese on a German car. And I'm like, hey, hold on. Like,
there's precedent here.
There was Japanese sponsors, and the Porsche Kremer K3 sponsored by Ghazi was an inspiration behind the colorway of my car, which, yeah, it's a gorgeous, like, powder pink and black and white car. It's unbelievable. I even have like a artist print of this car hanging in my office, as well as the skateboard with the design next to it, and even one of the 1/18th scale models of this. I'm obsessed with it. And so I think this was my like third or fourth time seeing it in person, and every time I see this car, I have to go walk up to it and stare at it for at least a couple minutes. I mean, walking around the paddock is like walking through an art museum. You just go from like pit stall to pit stall, and you just stare at this thing for 30 seconds to 3 minutes and just absorbing it in.
Yeah, how about the 110-year-old Pikes Peak Special that was probably running in the first or second ever Pikes Peak race? One of those ragtime racer cars out there. And on the side of the car, they have painted there, wins first, second at Pikes Peak, the 7 Lexington yellow car that we got to see sitting there.
Yeah, such an incredible piece of history. And you'd think, like, this car, which we talked about Pikes Peak and starting in 1916. 1916. You think this car would be sitting in a museum and hasn't moved for the last 5 decades. Nope, it was out at Laguna Seca in the ragtime group, and it's still running, and they still raced it. And this is back in the era where these drivers, you had to have a co-pilot. It wasn't like what we would think of a co-pilot nowadays of like, oh, they're just telling you to go left and right and all this stuff. It's like, no, that was the mechanic. He's making adjustments and pulling levers and changing timing and fuel mixture and all this sort of stuff to keep this thing running. And so you're staring at this vehicle that won the first and second Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, 1916, 1917. You're like, how the hell did this thing even get to 14,000 feet, let alone do it quickly?
It's such a scene, right? Cars that I never thought I was all that excited about, getting up and close with the new Mustangs, the GTD cars. Those things are badass. You look at them, they have this exposed inboard suspension in the rear and a plexiglass viewing window so that while you're driving the car, you could actually see the suspension engaging, seeing the springs and the struts moving. Kind of a cool thing. It made me appreciate that car in a way I hadn't before. The Benetton F1 car with all the United colors of Benetton sprinkled all over the car. Seeing that out there next to the old Tyrrell Elf car that you'd seen Jackie Stewart and Francois Sever and those guys driving. Just all that together, I feel like a little kid when I talk about it. It's just all these things together, like having access to all of that in one place. I can't think of any other event. I'm not aware of any other event that even comes close.
I just think it was such an amazing event. It gets me fired up for going back next year and really excited to see where these IROC cars go next. I mean, this was their kind of first big unveiling as one big group and representing all, 7 generations of the vehicles. And I'm excited to see if they do more events in the future and excited for Velocity Invitational, which is another incredible vintage event, motorsport mecca event that happens here at Sonoma Raceway. I hope that returns next year. Unfortunately, they passed on doing their event this year, which maybe put a little bit more pressure on us to be like, hey, we needed our motorsport fix, and by God, did the Rolex Motorsport Reunion give it to us. And what an unbelievable day. And it was awesome to share it with so many other car enthusiasts, and that's kind of what this whole thing's all about.
It was really cool to reconnect with some people we haven't seen. That's another thing about this event and these set of events is it brings a lot of repeat visitors. They go to see the evolution over time. They go to see the things that I didn't get to see last year and connected with a lot of old friends and acquaintances, people I hadn't seen in a long time, but somehow I managed to see every year when I get to Monterey for this event. So it has that value as well. Once you start doing it, it's really hard to put it down.
Putting the community and car community. Well, this has been our recap of Monterey Car Week. Obviously, we kept on the motorsport side of stuff. That's what we like, right? Other people go there for other reasons and they go to other shows. But we gave you our insights, basically our sights and sounds of what we experienced, which was a whole lot. And if you want to see some of the photo coverage of what we got to see and what we liked, what we didn't like from the Rolex Monterey Motorsport Reunion, go ahead and check out our Instagram and watch that video of 3 invaluable cars almost getting written off in the course of 4 seconds.
That's it. This is Cold Start. Come check us out. We're building a following on there too, and it's starting to get interesting. So you want to be part of it if you like what you're hearing here.
Keep up. Stay in touch. This has been Cold Start. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Sylas.
Thanks, Todd.